Understood. Got it. And maybe one other question that would be super interesting to understand is, as you saw these kind of things, right? Like let's say the supply chain transformation and digitization that you saw HUL do and then implemented yourself at Britannia, or as you were talking about the automation of pricing over the years at places like Flipkart. Maybe just one question trying to understand, did you see a lot of this either happening in-house in terms of people developing these capabilities through their internal, say, technology or engineering teams? Or
Yep.
would you also say that, it even then, you'd started seeing either vendors or startups or people who are focusing on building these specialized capabilities coming in and starting to sell automation solutions internally? So maybe just a little bit of a picture, if you could tell us how some of these transformations happened. Were they in-house? Were they external? What did that journey at that time look like, to just set the context for where we are now and going forward?
And very interesting question. I'll tell you why. Because it depends on the company, okay, and it depends on the mindset. If I'm a Flipkart, even everything, even if it's a basic tool, but there is the world's best provider out there who's built the best tool ever, I will still build it internally. Well, that's the mindset that used to exist in Flipkart. Because there's no right or wrong, because they have built their stack over the years. So any tool that they deploy, they tend to build it internally. Whereas when I was say in a Britannia, or maybe in a Clear Trip, right? Uh, you tend to take support from experts out there. You're okay, right? Now, this is more about mindset, and where I'm coming and why this is an interesting question is your choice of your ICP or TG, whatever you want to call it, has a big role to play. So tomorrow, if
Right.
you're trying to build a tool, say for the Flipkarts of the world, who tend to build such because they have strong internal product tech teams, and a lot of, say for example, if I have to build a discounting or a pricing tool for Flipkart, because it is so much inherently embedded in there, because that's their bread and butter, right? They would want to, the way they have built out their businesses, operations, etc., is so internal to them. With regulatory guidelines, we know all the jazz going around, right? So their operations is so intricate that they may be forced to do it internally. Whereas, for example, if I have to do with some other entity, right? Travel also, when I the discounting or the pricing part, I will do it internally. I will not want to bring in anyone else. Whereas if I'm doing like Clever Tab, like a platform like Clever Tab, wherein you're doing your marketing, that I may at ClearTrip I may take support from people, because there are players out there. But pricing is very core to you. You would want to keep it to yourself. So I think that's a balance. Uh, and interestingly, say for example, in my current avatar, what we were trying to do for physical AI, why we chose say physical workflows manufacturing, because that's a segment that what I'm trying to do, they can never do it. They have to take support from outside, because that kind of a skill set, core competence would never exist internally, right? But that's the easy part. The challenging part is, how do you convince them that there is value? So nothing comes easy, right? While I've
Yep. Yep.
chosen a TG very carefully, saying that this is something huge opportunity, they can never do it themselves, but for them to understand and appreciate what I'm saying is would be slightly tougher, right? For the lesser
Got it.
involved companies. Whereas if you go and tell the pricing guy in Flipkart, hey, this is my tool, this is what it does, he will get it within 1.5 seconds, right? And he will start engaging with you. But he may not buy it from you. Whereas, so that's the balance that you have to strike.
And on that note, then, moving on to the meat of the conversation, which is to understand the transformation potential that AI holds, the what, the why, the how. Maybe we start, right at the fundamentals. Um, you know, you've told us obviously your interest from an ICP perspective, from an opportunity perspective at a broad level on why you are focusing on physical operations. But maybe if you could tell us a little bit about, why you decided to start physical AI, what the business does, and what are the key problems that you think exist in the operational landscape today, that you'd want to solve, right? So I think setting some high level context for the business, and then we get into trying to understand some specific areas and opportunities for transformation. How do you pick the problem statements you want to solve? How do you think about product, GTM, and all of these things to better understand how such transformation in operations can and is being done?
Yeah, so for us, at least for me personally, this the problem emerged from a lot of discussion, right? So as I said, my original thesis, vision, AI, deep tech, right? And the more I understood, I felt that, say for example, to put it very simply, the number of cameras getting installed in globally would just be exploding, right? If it is already exploded, but it will further explode over time. Now, when I went deep into the B2B ecosystem, I realized that that's just a starting point. The core or the meat of, say, an enterprise, especially in manufacturing logistics, is so it's broadly called the trillion sensor economy, right? That's what we are moving towards. Now, so the core insight there was that there is so much of data which will get thrown at enterprises. What are they doing about it? Because over time, only if you are able to organize these data sets into in an intelligent manner, can you then use that data to improve yourself. Right now, what we found, and this was across 300, 400, 500 conversations, that yes, data exists. People observe it in a very ad hoc manner in case of there's an issue. So when you in a factory, if there is a safety accident, then someone would be deputed to see, okay, look at that video footage and see what went wrong, right? And then if they are able to see, then they do a reactive kind of a plug-in of that problem, so that you are reducing chances of that happening in the future. But for the way we were looking at it is that it is already happening, right? These cameras and sensors are already talking to you. What stops an enterprise from being proactive, bringing it all together, right? And then being predictive in an ideal scenario, right? So if you are saying, say for example, right, in a factory setup, there is a heavy crane, and we've seen this live. There is a heavy crane which is moving in a certain direction. By simple logic, people are not supposed to walk underneath, right? The chance of a fatality could be 1 in a million, but once that happens, the emotional actual cost is humongous. And especially for evolved companies, they just cannot bear that. And if you go into a market like the US, that's even more, right? For the obvious reasons, which we all know. So now, if you know that Rajiv Subramanian as a worker is underneath that heavy crane, right? It first of all, it's if you are on across a 50-100 acre campus and you've got about 500 cameras, it's humanly, we all know it's humanly impossible to station 100 people to keep looking at that video footage, right? And it's not even good business sense. So now, how do I identify Rajiv is under that heavy crane? Do an intelligent alert for him to move out of that space. Now, that's as simple as it gets, right? It's common sense. Now, today, it happens post facto in most cases. Just to take this simple example, how do we make it reactive and maybe going ahead, it could be predictive, wherein if Rajiv is moving towards that zone, I start doing an amber alert so that he doesn't even come under he doesn't even come into that AI zone, right? So that was the journey. So I'm just giving you one example of one type of safety incident. So if you take the broader use case of safety, it becomes much larger. And just to give you a sense, safety is just one type of operation, right? Which is run in a manufacturing or a logistics or any setup. It's also run in your offices. If you take a manufacturing facility, there are about 150 SOPs, physical SOPs, which would be run. Now, all of them face this problem. Now, that's one of the learnings, right? That don't start while we thought that we could attack all 150, but it's important to focus on one which you believe your TG is struggling with, willing to pay for, has a potential profit pool, and all stakeholders have a win-win, right? So
Yep.
that was the broad journey. So maybe I have jumped your question, which you might have asked later, but that's somewhat of the journey that we have taken in physical AI. Basically, starting uh, we met B2B enterprise CEOs, CEOs, head of manufacturing facilities. We came in with a certain approach, but the more we engaged with them, we realized that the problem is much bigger. The
Right.
canvas is much bigger. So how do you broaden your canvas but still come in with a wedge, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
and be focused about it.
Got it. Understood. And one of the things I wanted to also ask, right? Like there are so many different things as you mentioned that you could potentially operate, that you could potentially um, automate in ways and forms do in a manufacturing setup, right? Or in any sort of these industrial setups. You went after, say, the data fusion, safety, security as a wedge to sort of dive in on. As you were alluding before, you made this decision from the basis of, okay, what is an in-house capability that someone will never want to let go of or partner with for? And what is a capability that they struggle with and they necessarily need the expertise of an outsider to come and develop and implement these capabilities? Was also curious to understand in the context of the wedge that you mentioned, right? Safety, security, some of these things, given that they are such a big part of the physical operations that an ops heavy company, whether manufacturing, logistics, shipping, etc., anybody would be running, why was this a space where you got the response, you got the feeling that people were keen to sort of partner with players like yourself, rather than try and say, ki, hey, we've been doing manufacturing for 100 years, safety is part and parcel of it, so we will do this ourselves like we've done other things ourselves as well. Just wanted to get a quick
Yeah,
view.
and so I gave you safety as an example. That's one of the two things that we are doing. But to give you a sense of the framework, right? So
Yes,
I'll just maybe spend 2-3 minutes as to how this journey panned out. I'll cover it in 2-3 minutes, but it obviously took much longer
of
to
course.
come to that. So
Sure.
the starting point, as I said, is B2B enterprise physical workflows. Now, in enterprise, you have maybe 10-12 types of enterprises, right? It's construction, manufacturing. You will have offices like that. You will have logistics. So there's a long list of broad 10-12 that can be further broken up into 130, 140. Now, as I said, the starting point was people are getting that data or seem to have access to that data, but they are not doing much about it. So where is the problem of data plenty, right? It became our starting point. Now, where is that problem? So when you go into where are complex operations being done, right? Is so we had a surrogate of the number of data points in a typical facility. That's when manufacturing and logistics threw up themselves, right? That's where the complexity arose. So we took a whole host of these enterprise segments. Okay, where is the complexity? But then there was so it's a typical 2 by 2, right? And that's where the consultant ad comes in. So where is the need? Uh, where is the data point that is coming and where is the need, right? Once we did that mapping, so like offices also data points are coming up. But when we engaged with that entire ecosystem, we realized that it's sort of is there a need? Is there scope? The answer is yes, but the pool is limited because there are a lot of providers who are already there. So property management consultants, the biggies of the world, and there are smaller players who've taken up. So you would have in your office, right? In any office setup, people who are managing offices, right? Now they're already there and they're doing a decent job of it, right? So when you do the data complexity need versus the use case kind of a mapping, that's when your manufacturing as a use case came in, right? As a focus segment, manufacturing logistics initial. We, as per our hypothesis, yes, this could be much broader, but this is the initial wedge. Now, within manufacturing logistics, as I said, there were about 150 SOPs, etc., that we were looking at. Now, and for any new company, and that's also a learning, right? For a new startup, you need to identify your initial wedge, which slightly disconnects you from a lot of interdependencies with the ecosystem because you're small. People will not come and that okay, I'm Rajesh Subramanian, I'm building something like this. Uh, I'll partner with you, and I'll tell you why. Because in manufacturing, a lot of the manufacturing execution systems are built by the global biggies, and ABBs, the Siemens, right? So
Could you also maybe then take 10 seconds,
Mhm.
tell us what an MES is? Because it's a fairly technical aspect. I think it'd be helpful for people to just understand what an MES is, what it does. Because I think it's
Yeah, yeah,
core
sure.
in some ways
And I'll try,
to everything you're
yeah,
saying.
yeah, yeah. I'll try to do it simplistically. MES is just a manufacturing execution system. Just imagine that I'm running a steel factory, right? I am making TMT bars, right? Just for example. So I get my raw material, wrought iron, I mix in waste, etc. I melt it, and then I convert it into long bars, and from that I draw out my TMT bars, right? So that's the broad sense. Now, my core manufacturing, right, which is, it could be melting or it could be drawing out my TMT bars. Those machines are typically built by the ABBs, the Siemens of the world. Now, these are very, as you can imagine, these are all complex, large systems, right? Large physically and very, very complex in terms of how they are interlinked between each other. Now, typically, all of this, right? I would have loved to show you an image. I've got lots of them, but if people can imagine, just imagine uh, a Star Trek scene wherein people are sitting, or maybe a aeroplane scene with a lot of controllers. It's exactly like that. So that's how even a medium evolved manufacturing setup in India is run like that, by the way. You may be surprised, right? But you have the ABB Siemens of the world who have come and installed those machines wherein temperature data, pressure data, all of that is super critical, because if you are supposed to work in a certain temperature range and it goes beyond or below, then you won't get your product. People cannot afford that. So that's the manufacturing execution system. Now, for us, a lot of the 150 SOPs are linked to that MES, right? In some way or the other. Now, I need to choose my SOPs again. So again, a two by two emerges, right? Wherein which are those SOPs which are critical but have lesser dependency on this core MES? Because if I have to integrate with this core MES, you typically an ABB, a Siemens, they have their own revenue and profit stream, right? Wherein if any customization, that's how it works, right? So if you all know how the software ecosystem works, any customization, they make money out of it. So now they are not like, they would have very limited public APIs because that's their core, that's their bread and butter. Now, we need to then choose areas which are slightly delinked from that but are still critical. So in that mapping, again, there were two, three areas which emerged, and safety was one of them, right? I'll give you one very interesting example. One initial use case we had, and maybe Rohit, you remember in one of our earlier discussions, that predictive maintenance, right? Now, predictive maintenance, is that an opportunity? Yes, it is. But to do anything there, I need to be inside that MES. I need to have access to the data from that MES to be able to then build my system around it. But as a startup today, you can still do it if you have a design partner, and we'll discuss that. But as a startup, for you to get access to that is tough. So why do you want to build your initial wedge wherein you have such a huge dependency and on an external entity and an external relationship, which will be tough to crack? So you choose a wedge which you have a easier uh, way in,
Right.
but it cannot be a wedge which people will not be willing to pay for, right? Or it's not their
Understood.
problem station. That's the balance that you need to do.
Understood. No, I think this makes a lot of sense because as you know, I continue to look at software and AI companies across even different sectors. Like this parallel holds through in healthcare, this parallel holds through in insurance, in banking, etc. Right? Like I think in banking, it's a great example. People are again developing a lot of AI and automation solutions. Someone's focusing on the calling and customer interaction part. Someone's focusing on document on handling and the customer journey. Someone say focusing on collections, right? These are all core but critical parts of the customer life cycle, but they say not touching the core underwriting engine, the credit decisioning engine, because again that is very complex. That's in many ways say a bank or a lender's core IP at certain points of time, right? Or if it's not core IP and it's a more traditional larger lender, then they've probably gotten an Infosys or a TCS or someone over the years to build and maintain a very, very large sort of like decisioning system, right? Analogous to your MES for Siemens and ABB. I think again in healthcare, you would see the similar thing where a lot of people are implementing AI for say note taking between the doctor patient conversation. People are implementing AI for managing insurance billing, etc. But when it comes to medical decisioning, right? Ultimately, here in the parallel would be the doctor, right? Or the SOPs of the hospital and how they do things is their sort of like IP and capability, right? And that's not something that people are going immediately into saying, okay, let's replace the core execution itself with AI.